I was 19 years old at the time. I had a really good opportunity to go to college, but things fell through a couple of months into it, and basically, I wasn't allowed to go back at that college. I'm not going to go into the details, but I found myself stuck. I was living at home with my parents and working at McDonald's most of the time. I was really disappointed in myself, especially because I didn't have anyone else to blame but myself. I seemed to be your typical college dropout that ended up working at fast food. But while I was working there, I had a couple of really strange experiences. So the first one happened like this. There was this really creepy customer. He was an old man, and he just seemed like the most insane individual ever. You just have to think of the physical embodiment of Florida Man. He always wore this bathroom robe with a stained white t-shirt underneath. Or shoes. He had these really old Nikes that seemed like they had been completely covered in mud and never washed. Everywhere he stepped, there was some residue coming off of his shoes. I don't know how far he lived, but this guy came in to eat at McDonald's 4 or 5 times a day for as long as I worked there. I never personally had any horrible experiences with him. It wasn't like he was this unruly customer. He always asked for extra ketchup, but it's not like that was a crime or anything. The story is weird because I remember talking about him with some of my coworkers. I had one friend there that I became rather close with. I remember talking with her about this creepy guy that had just came in to eat McDonald's all the time wearing his pajamas. When you work with the public, there are so many people and faces that you see all the time, and none of them mean anything. It's just another customer. But when you have someone like this, it almost makes the job a little bit more bearable. As weird as that might sound, a little bit more consistency to the job. Plus, making jokes about someone like that was kind of fun. But there was one day when the jokes weren't funny anymore, because he stopped coming in. They couldn't find out why either. I mean, when you see someone multiple times a day, every day for months on end, you get a little surprised when they stop showing up. It all just seemed, I don't know, unusual. I remember talking to my friend about it. Neither of us could imagine why he stopped. I remember getting a phone call at 2 in the morning that night, though. I guess my friend had gotten curious and looked around online. She's a bit of an insomniac. I guess he had been arrested on multiple drug charges. She had found a picture of him in the public database for our county's police department. In the mugshot, he was wearing that exact same bathrobe that we always saw him wearing. That was interesting. Really weird to think that someone I saw and interacted with multiple times a day was an actual dealer. But I guess that was that. My other experience working at McDonald's was really bad. Not going to lie to you, it really freaks me out and really made me question humanity. So it happened like this, right? I was working the graveyard shift. It must have been around 12 a.m. and we didn't have any customers. We already cleaned all the machines as much as we could, and there really wasn't anything to do. We lived in a smaller community, so there weren't too many people coming in to eat at such a late hour. We had a few here and there, but we were mostly just sitting around, particularly slow this night. I remember going over to check the garbage cans for the other side of the store. Occasionally, we would forget to empty that garbage pail. It was directly behind a booth and out of sight from the area we normally worked in. I remember going over there, and there were 2 big bags of garbage that needed to be taken out. They were too heavy to take out at the same time, so I did what any sane person would do. I carried one out at a time. I remember bringing the first one. I threw it into the dumpster, and I remember hurting my back a little when I did it. I went for a little bit of a theatrical throw and really felt it there. I went back into the store to get the second bag of garbage, and I made my way outside. I got about 10 feet away from the dumpster when I saw something that shocked me. I dropped the bag of garbage. I couldn't believe my eyes. There was a mutilated puppy. Its entire snout had been cut off. I wasn't sure if it was alive or not. It wasn't moving or anything. I took a step closer to try to see a little bit more, and I just felt my heart drop into my stomach. It was the most horrifying thing I'd ever seen in person. It was definitely dead. It wasn't leaning up against the dumpster, and it was just a horrifying thing to see. I ran back inside and asked my coworkers what we should do. We decided to call the police, but they didn't really help much. We were really freaked out at who could have possibly done this and why they would put the puppy there of all places. And the part that still freaks me out is that whoever had done this had been waiting for me to go back inside of the building, and in the few seconds before I came back out, put it right next to the dumpster. I figured they must have been watching me. Didn't know what else to think about it though. Our McDonald's didn't have an outside camera other than the drive-thru, so there was no hope of trying to identify the person that did this. But it still makes me sick to my stomach to think what that person could be like.
A few years ago, I was down on my luck on the relationship scene. My girlfriend of 3 years had just broken up with me because she had just started dating her boss. And when I found out, I came to know that it had been going on for the last 2 years. Isn't that just peachy? Anyways, I joined Tinder. Something that I am not proud of. I tried to connect with a bunch of girls at home that I can find someone decent while I am down. Don't get me wrong. I am not looking for a quick hookup, but I needed someone to fill that void from the previous relationship. I wanted someone to love. That's when I connected with Christina. She seemed really nice during the messages, and we lived really close to each other. Too close, in fact. And we agreed to meet up at a local restaurant in the week ahead. I was getting really interested. We were messaging all the time, and within a short period of time, it was getting really serious. We went on our date and got on very well, and before long, she started telling me that she loved me. Now, I'm not sure how other people feel about this, but for me, it is a really big deal to admit this. And I certainly wasn't in a position to say it back to her. Something which she took very badly. She asked me why I didn't say it back, and me being the straight up guy that I am, simply told her the truth, that I just didn't feel that way. But if she allowed our relationship to grow and nurture, I was sure I would feel the same way with time, and that people move on at a different rate, yada yada yada. She was really unhappy, but to her credit, she tried her best not to make me feel uncomfortable, and we carried on with our date that night. A few weeks later, things heated up a little more. We were moving up to the next level, if you know what I mean, and she ended up staying over at my place that night. I woke up about 3 a.m. to use the toilet, and when I looked, she is not in bed with me. Now, this time being the first time we did the nasties, I wondered if she had just gone home. I wasn't really sure of the perimeter regarding this with her, so I look around and she is nowhere to be seen on the top floor. I go downstairs and the smell of fire catches my nostrils. I look outside my garden and she has taken this metal bin and started a fire. I ran up to her and asked her what the hell she was doing, and she was burning loads of my things. She looked at me with this cold, dead stare and said, "You can't have any of this. That's why you don't love me, because you keep things that she gave in this house." I was absolutely horrified. I don't know from where she made this assumption. My CDs, DVDs, hell, even my iPhone, and a whole bunch of other stuff were now melting away in this fire. I was horrified, and I told her that she needed to go, and that I was calling the police and the fire department.
It was the 1980s. My father was an electrical engineer who was just returning from a job site. He worked long hours, and it wasn't uncommon for him to be heading home around midnight to the small cabin he shared with a friend tucked back in the canyon walls. It was pouring rain, Lightning flashed only to illuminate the murky puddled patches of washed-out terrain. As my father rounded the corner upon the dirt road, he passed a large willow tree. As his headlights crossed its base, he noticed someone was crouched underneath it. It was a woman who seemed to be in her late 20s, with long tangled blonde hair. She had on fairly casual clothing, and carried a somewhat large bundle under her arms wrapped in cloth. My father, being the gentleman that he was, decided to pull over and offered her to take shelter from the storm in his cabin, just up the road. She smiled and thanked him. As she got into his vehicle, she explained that she had been on a hike through the canyon that day when the storm hit, and she had been caught off guard by the rain. Dad smiled and pointed out that she wasn't exactly wearing the best clothing or shoes to go on a hike. She laughed and said that she had left her place on a whim unprepared. He asked if she needed him to dry anything at his place, pointing to the bundle she held tightly under her arm. Her voice suddenly got very stern and stated no. When my father asked her where she lived around the area, things started to get strange. She started telling my dad that she had no friends or family in the area and was quite vague when asked about details of where she lived. All she responded with was that it was too far to drive to tonight in this kind of weather. At this point, my dad said he felt that she was a bit off, but chalked it up to her exhaustion from hiking and standing out in the storm for several hours. As they entered the cabin, my dad remembered that his roommate had left that morning to take a trip out of town and wouldn't be back for several days. My dad would have offered her his friend's room, but wouldn't feel comfortable doing that without her permission. Remember, this was the 1980s. Pocket cell phones weren't on everyone yet. My dad told her that she was welcome to sleep on the couch and dry off as he handed her several towels. She took them from him with her right hand, but still never let go of the bundle she hugged under her left arm. My dad at this point realized that she had never given him her name, so he introduced himself. "Nice to meet you. My name is Mary Lou," she replied. My father started to feel a bit more at ease and turned on the television for her and handed over the remote. She scanned through the channels, finally deciding on a gangster flick. There was a scene that involved a bunch of mobsters getting shot to pieces. Mary found this to be quite amusing and started to laugh in a crackling, high-pitched tone. My dad started to get a bit creeped out by this. She was enjoying it a little too much, he said. Then my dad asked her about her life, and things took a turn for the worse. When asked if she was in a relationship, she pointed down at her belt buckle and told my dad the story of her breakup. She claimed her last boyfriend wanted to be domineering over her, and to this she responded by bludgeoning him half to death in his gravel driveway with her belt buckle, the same one she was wearing. He kept saying stop, please stop, and begging, but I wouldn't show him mercy, she said, with a note of pride in her voice. My dad asked if he had been abusing her, or if she was reacting defensively, and she merely scoffed and said, "No, otherwise he would be dead." My father's unease grew as the conversations progressed. She told him about her mother dying on the operating table, and how the surgeon who had been working on her walked out covered in blood and said that she would be fine. How is she supposed to be okay with all of her guts in the trash can? She spewed. Then she laughed again, glancing back at the TV screen, littered with disheveled, bullet-ridden corpses. I love the sight of blood. It excites me, turns me on, you know. Death. Draining them to death. At this point, my dad was officially done. He was bigger and stronger than she was, and he was quite streetwise as well, and had seen plenty of horrors in his life. But the way she spoke with a violent confidence, combined with her sure grip upon the bundle which lay under her arm, sent chills down his spine. He needed a plan. Finally, an idea popped into my father's head. I have a friend who's a priest in town. He has access to plenty of shelters funded by the church. You would be a lot more comfortable there instead of on our couch. They can feed you too, and arrange a ride for you to get home in the morning. I can call him right now. He's only a few miles from here. he stated reassuringly. Mary Lou's tone brightened to match his. "That sounds wonderful. Thank you so much." My father smiled, hiding his relief. "Of course, it's the least I could do for you." As my dad walked over to the phone and began to dial the number, Mary Lou erupted in a low guttural growl. "I hate priests. I hate priests." She said it with a tired hatred, a clear, distinct, audible whispered disdain from the bottom of her heart with an unflinching resolve. My dad had enough. This wasn't a game to play anymore. This was beyond a stranger with odd tendencies. A darkness with coiled cruelty had crossed the threshold of his door. "You need to leave, and you need to leave now," my dad said, pointing to the front of the cabin. "There's the door. I can't have you here and feel comfortable. I'm sorry, but the storm has stopped, and I hate to have you walk in the dark, but that's the way this has to go. Please leave." Mary Lou gazed upon him, expressionless, and finally just shrugged. My father walked her out, standing close to her, in the event that the bundle concealed some type of weapon. He wasn't taking any chances. She smiled at him as she slowly walked onto the front porch. "Goodbye for now. I'll see you when I see you," she said calmly. With that, she walked down the long dirt road, with a single streetlight upon its path. She looked back at him one last time, before crossing the light and disappearing, enveloped by the darkness with no trace of her to be seen. My dad called the police the next day, concerned that she may still be hiding on his premises somewhere, after speaking to his girlfriend about it, who is now my mom, and being convinced by her that she was going to cut the window screen when he was gone, hide in the house, and then kill him. They found nothing, and said the area attracted a lot of transients and nomads. My father then made the mistake of telling his engineer buddies at work, which resulted in them bidding him farewell at the end of each shift, in the form of asking that he say hi to Mary Lou for them. My dad never saw her again. He still questions what could have been in that bundle that she so adamantly protected. He will never know.
I grew up in what people would consider a bad household. My mom and dad were in a bad relationship, and they did nothing but argue every day. My mom would complain that my dad would stick in the basement almost every day and never spend any time with me. And my dad would always have the same response, that he's doing research down there. The only problem was that we were prohibited from going down to the basement. 3 locks were built into the basement door, and he kept his one key on his old key ring. The key had a torn blue sticker at the bottom of it with a brown rusty tip. However, my mom finally got a hold of it somehow, and that same day when I came home from school, Dad suddenly told me she left us for another man. He seemed truly broken and sunk in his misery, so I tried pretending to be normal at first. But I couldn't stop crying like a baby when I finally got back in my room. After a few months of emotional breakdowns, my dad finally got over it. Furthermore, he started to visit the basement more consistently to the point where I would feel like I lived alone. I kept thinking my dad was working very hard, since I saw him being very distraught after coming upstairs from the basement. I thought everything was fine, until I started hearing noises at night. They weren't just regular noises. It was kind of someone's crying and scream of agony. But the most disturbing sound of all was the sound of growling, like some kind of beast would exist down in the basement. The next morning I complained to my dad, but he acted like he had no idea what I was talking about as he walked past me to get ready for work. So I just shook it off, assuming that he was watching some horror movie down there, or if I was just imagining the whole thing. I went back to my room. As it was the weekend, I was ready to catch up on some Saturday morning cartoons. I turned on my TV, and as I got ready to change the channel, I heard a familiar name. The news reporter was naming over 40 missing people in our town, and my mom was one of those names as they briefly showed her picture and information. I was confused about who would file a missing person report for her, because my grandparents both died in a tragic car accident years ago. She had no siblings, and my dad told me she left us for another man. I wanted to inform my dad, but soon I was concerned it would make him depressed again. And in a way, I was still angry at her for leaving us. So I ignored it and changed the channel. A few minutes later, my dad came in to tell me he was leaving for work. He gave me a kiss on my forehead and informed me that he'd be back later that night. After he left, I invited my best friend Austin to come over. He then arrived shortly after, and we played a game on my PlayStation. As we were about to plunge into the game, we suddenly heard a strange noise coming from the basement. "What was that?" Austin asked, being confused. "I don't know. My dad does some kinds of experiments down there. It's probably a rat or something." Austin looked amused. "No, dude, we can't go down there. My dad said so," I said quickly, bringing an end to Austin's excitement. It has no reason to doubt that Austin was disappointed. Then he asked for something to drink, so I went to the kitchen to get some juice for him. However, I was hit with a foul odor of something rotting as soon as I arrived in the kitchen. I looked around to see what could be the cause of the smell, and I found that the basement door was cracked open. I went to close it, but the curiosity got the best of me. So I called Austin to help me investigate. We darted down the stairs to the basement, clenching our noses at that horrible smell. It was dark until Austin found a light switch and quickly flicked it on. However, we had to regret our decision instantly after we saw the inside of the basement. There were people hanging from hooks with random limbs missing. As we were standing in horror, Austin clenched my shirt strongly. I could see the piles of feces and human remains contained within certain sections of the room. But the most disturbing and disgusting sight of all was the cage in the dark right corner of the room. The inside of it seemed to be a person sleeping at first, but as it looked up, I quickly realized that thing was not a person. What is that?" Austin shouted, shaking with fear. I ignored his question. To be more specific, I couldn't answer. That thing was indescribably frightening. It looked like a deformed human with its mouth filled with crooked and ragged teeth covering a majority of its face. Its face pointed outward, with creases where the nose should be. The eyes were bulging out of its head as it fixated its glance toward Austin and me. "Food," it said to us slowly with excitement and a malicious voice. Then it started clawing at the iron bars of the cage with its needle-like hands. I sat there in horror until Austin grabbed my wrist. We ran up the stairs scrambling for the escape and shut the door. After I made sure it was perfectly locked, I saw Austin sitting on the carpet floor with his knees to his chest. Once we had a few moments of silence, I then finally realized what really happened to my mom and those missing people in our town. At that instant, Austin muttered like this: "Your dad, he was feeding those people to that thing. Now, what should I do now?" When I was 8 years old, I used to live in my grandma's house in Ecuador. Many of the neighbors would talk to my parents about seeing weird stuff in the house, like shadows moving around the windows when we weren't home. The first thing that would come to our heads was that someone must have broken into the house, but nothing would ever be missing. Of course, they didn't think that there was someone breaking in. They were sure that our house was haunted. Everyone even refused to come inside for parties or any other special occasion. They told us to get a priest and to get rid of any bad spirits. We didn't take their warnings as something important because my parents don't believe in those kinds of things. Although I would hear someone going up the stairs at night, our stairs were really old, so they would make a loud sound when someone would step on them. However, when I checked, there was nothing. I would just run to my bed and cover my head with the sheets until I fell asleep. One night, someone started knocking on the door really hard and screaming. We got really scared as it was 12:30 a.m. and everyone was asleep by then in our neighborhood. It was extremely rare that someone would be up at that time. My dad took his shotgun and told my mom and me to stay in my room and not move. I was scared for my dad's safety, but I felt relieved when my dad said my neighbor's name. He informed us that a water pipe had broke in our backyard and the water was spraying his house and broke one of his windows. He was nice about the situation and even said he'd help us fix the pipe. My dad got the shovels, as the pipes were underground, and we had to dig to see what was wrong and how we could fix it. As we started digging, they realized that they needed other materials, and they went to get it, leaving me alone in the backyard. There was barely any light back there. The only source of light we had was the moon, and one light post a block away from my house. I was pissed off. I mean, how could they leave an 8-year-old boy there by himself in the dark? But I didn't say anything about it. About 10 minutes had gone by since they left, and I was wondering what was taking them so long. They were only getting some materials after all. But as I was going to go back inside, I saw something moving really fast at the corner of my eye. I froze. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. All I could do was move my eyes. I started to freak out, looking around to see what the hell was running around me. I didn't see anything. It was as if there was nothing there at all. But then I looked to my right, and I saw something that haunts me to this very day. It was a demon, in my opinion. It was so tall, around 7 or 8 feet tall. It had long, skinny legs with a really buff body. It also had very long spiral horns, and his eyes shined in the dark. I still couldn't move. The thing ran by me, looked at me, but it didn't do anything to me. It just looked at me. It could have been a goat or a sheep. I've never seen one so big or one that walks on 2 legs like a human. It ran, and I hid behind a big tree by my neighbor's house. Finally, I could move. I yelled at the top of my lungs while crying hysterically. My dad came running with his shotgun in hand and asked me what was wrong. I explained what I saw to him, but he didn't believe me, nor did my mom. But someone did. My neighbor told me that he thought nothing happened to me because I'm a kid. As time passed, I slowly got over it. I moved from that house and moved to New York. My grandparents sold the house, and I left that experience in the past. However, that's not where this story ends. In my sophomore year in high school, I had a nightmare. The thing that I saw that night was in it this time. I could only see its head as it was hiding behind the big tree. He said 3 words that'll haunt me until my time comes. It said, "You can't hide." I woke up from my nightmare and headed to school. While in school, at around 12:30 p.m., there was an announcement. A classmate of mine had been killed in front of my school by a car without brakes. I turned pale as I thought my nightmare may have something to do with the incident. I was scared and even went home early. I told my parents about it, but this time they took me to a priest and he said he'd give me something in 3 days. Every single day I had the same nightmare until my priest gave me a blessed cross, and I haven't had any nightmares about the thing anymore. However, every night I sleep with the covers over my head. Call me a coward or anything you want, but the thing still hasn't left my mind. Those 3 words haunt me till this day, making me wonder when I will forget or move on from the thing.
I've been working at McDonald's now for over 5 years, and this is still my creepiest experience there. This happened 2 years ago when I was 18, and I had been working my first overnight shift on front counter. I usually work in the kitchen on overnights, so I had no interactions with any of the customers until then. I was working from 10 p.m. until 6 a.m., which is a usual overnight shift for us. Around 3 a.m. I was making some fries when I noticed a man standing there and trying to take pictures with his cell phone of me and my other female coworker, Rebecca. I pointed it out to her and she just rolled her eyes in annoyance and went to take an order in drive-thru, telling me it happened a lot. I was instantly uncomfortable. I wanted to tell the manager, but he was in the office doing his manager stuff and I didn't want to bother him. I went over with what I felt was a nervous smile and quickly did my usual greeting. "Hello, what can I get for you?" He just kind of looked at me and stayed quiet. He was about 5'8", white, early 20s, medium build with dark hair and brown eyes. An average man, I would say, but something about his piercing glare made me feel super uncomfortable. Then he smiled, a smile that sent shivers down my spine. "I'll just have a coffee. Black, sweetie," he said, and I could instantly smell alcohol on his breath. I nodded and told him the price before he pulled out a $5 bill and went to hand it to me, making sure our hands touched. I avoided his gaze and went to hand back his change when he winked at me and went to go wait for his coffee. I went to go make it as fast as I could, but, just my luck, we were out of coffee on both the front counter and the drive-thru, as we don't sell much through the night. I turned around and kept as little eye contact as I possibly could. "I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to brew you a fresh pot. Should only take about 3 minutes." "Don't worry, I don't mind. I have quite the view while I wait," he replied, shooting me a wink. I just smiled awkwardly and looked away. I had to make sure I didn't fall behind on my shift, so I began to set up the muffins on the display so we had them all ready for breakfast, which starts at 4 a.m. in Canada. "So, Susan," I heard behind me, realizing it was the guy. I instantly tensed, wondering how he knew my name before I noticed I had my name tag on and quietly cursed to myself. I turned around and looked at him, and he said, "What time are you stuck here until tonight, beautiful?" I instantly panicked as I didn't do well in these situations. 7, I said nervously, which then the guy gave me a huge grin. "Oh, so you still have time before you're off, eh?" I nodded and noticed the coffee was done pouring, so I went over and made his coffee as he watched me with an intense stare. I handed it to him before saying, "Have a nice night," earning me another wink. He then waved and said as he turned around, "I'll see you later, Susan." I watched as he walked out the door and tried to calm myself down. He doesn't actually know when I'm off, so I'm okay, I thought to myself. 6 a.m. rolled around, and it was finally time to go. I still felt a little paranoid about the guy, but I knew it was now in the past. My coworker Chris was going to drop me off at home as we carpooled, so we got our stuff together and left. As we were heading to his car, I noticed a parked car with someone in it, and of course, it was the guy. I panicked and quickly told Chris that was the guy, as I had told him what happened not long ago. He instantly brought me into his coat and did his best to keep me hidden as we walked quickly to his car. He made sure no one followed the car, dropped me off, and watched as I went inside, telling me to stay safe. I thanked him before going into my house and going to bed. The next day, I went into work and got asked by my manager how I got home. I told them Chris gave me a ride. My manager looked confused and said something that made my blood run cold. "Oh, that's strange, because some guy was here looking for you just before 7. He said he was here to pick you up." I thought before that the man's intentions weren't good. Just the way he looked at me and spoke to me, like I was prey. And this pretty much confirmed it. Since then, I have refused to work front counter overnight shift, and we no longer wear our name tags overnight.
That I've done the right thing, and I don't feel guilty. When I was a teenager, school was a nightmare because of this bastard. His name was Jake. He'd always beat me up and bully me. I suffered a lot of pain and humiliation, thinking that I'm gonna kill this bastard someday. Of course, everything seemed to be forgotten after graduating from high school, and I, who turned 20 years old, was working part-time. Then one day, Jake suddenly appeared in front of me. While waiting for the bus after work, someone tapped me on the shoulder. When I turned around, it was Jake. He hadn't changed a bit. "Hey, dumbass, long time no see." At first, I tried to ignore him. Then he got angry. "Are you ignoring me right now? Do you want to get smacked in the face or something?" I had enough. My anger exploded just then when he raised his fist and threatened me. Of course, I should have just endured it then. But I still don't think what I did was wrong. He needed to be punished anyway. I greeted him with a smile. "Oh, hey Jake, you look like a new man." Only then did he laugh after I complimented him on purpose. "It's been a while. Want to grab some beer with me, Jake?" I said. "All right, you're buying me today." He said yes without hesitation. However, my goal was to get revenge on him that day. We drank beer at a nearby bar. Jake started to order all kinds of expensive drinks and forced me to buy them all. I was working part-time back then, so of course I couldn't pay for it all because of my poor budget. But he took my wallet, took out the card, and paid for all the alcohol and food. I finally made up my mind. I'm gonna kill him. I came up with an idea while he went to the restroom. I took my sleeping pills out of my bag and poured them all into Jake's beer. After he came back, we continued drinking, and after a while, he fell asleep completely. I carried him on my back, went into a motel room nearby, and started to think about how I'm going to kill him. I thought I had a pretty good idea. I decided to set fire to the room he was lying in. I tried to fabricate the whole situation as if Jake was alone in his room and didn't put out a cigarette. I lit a cigarette, put it next to him, and closed the door. I sat in the alley in front of the motel building and waited. About an hour later, I heard the fire truck siren. Sure enough, smoke was rising in the motel room. Everything was going according to plan. Jake probably suffocated to death, or so I thought. I walked into the motel building and went up to the third floor. The smoke was billowing up in the hallway. I could see people escaping. Just then, I saw him in the middle of the smoke. His body was charred, but still burning. He was running towards me directly. He was running frantically without even screaming. Being terrified, I plopped down on the ground and he started squeezing me around the neck. I could feel his burning hands wrapped around my neck, causing tremendous pain. Jake's face was completely charred. I couldn't recognize anything apart from his bloodshot eyes. I fainted slowly while he was strangling me with all his might. Fortunately, firemen soon ran towards me to stop him and put Jake on a stretcher. From what I heard, he kept shouting my name over and over again on the way to the hospital. "Chris! Chris! Chris!" Rescuers tried to stop Jake, but he shook off all the hands and kept shouting my name. His throat was gushing blood. Then, he eventually died because his throat was filled up with blood. Yes, I committed a murder, but this is nothing compared to the pain I got from him. He deserved to be punished. Even though I'm in prison now, it doesn't matter. I'm very happy. After all, I did the right thing.
The squad car behind it. On a ghostly black road in the middle of nowhere, a veteran officer was walking a rookie through his first night of rounds and his first possible traffic citation. This car was going 20 under, making it an easy target. See, now that we run the plate number, the driver should be Fred Halls, an adult male. White, brown hair, brown eyes. Okay, you're up, kid. Just take it slow. License and registration. That's all you need to get. I'll get those and come back. I'll walk you through the rest. Jane told the rookie, trying to be as encouraging as possible. He looked nervous but determined. Okay, I got this, he said, and with a deep breath stepped out of the car. Jane watched from the passenger side, grinning a little, and remembered her first night pulling over strangers in the dark. She watched him shining his flashlight in, chest puffed out. He spoke briefly, then shined his light to the back seat, then back at the driver. The driver turned his head slowly and spoke a little. Her grin started to fade, however. The rookie was walking back, empty-handed. He pulled open the door and said quickly. She could see his pale face. "What are you doing, kid? Where are his papers?" She barked at him, but he didn't even look at her. "We should go. Now." That was all he said, his face frozen, a head in fear. "What are you talking about? We can't just go. What's going on? What's got you spooked?" He said nothing. She looked at the car ahead, and the driver was just sitting there. "Fine, I'll take this one. Just breathe, kid." She sighed and stepped out. Jane shined her own flashlight and walked to the driver's side where the window was still rolled down. Putting the beam on the driver, she said assertively, "License and registration, please." The man who turned his head slowly appeared to match the description of Fred Hall's: brown hair, brown eyes. But the rest of him was wrong. His eyes were bloodshot to the point of bursting. His skin looked like plastic. His mouth cut on each side to outline his jaw. His hands were stuck to the steering wheel, bright reflective piano wire working severed digits that tapped at the wheel. "What the?" she said. "What seems to be the problem, officer?" said Fred, clanking his jaw every syllable. She could see the piano wire coming from the back of his head jerked like a fish on a line. She followed the line to see hundreds in the back seat. It was all leading to the trunk. Panning light drew her attention, and she looked to see the squad car turning around, and in disbelief she had to watch it speeding off without her. She drew her gun. And behind her, the car door opened. "What seems to be the problem, officer?"
This story is from 5 years ago, but it still gives me chills when I think about it. At that time, there was a young man in our neighborhood who was rumored to be kind. His name was Ian. He always carried a flag with him, and whenever I ran into him, he would stop, hold my hand, and pray for me. One day he whispered to me, "You have such a pure soul, so I'll tell a secret only to you. I was actually an angel living in heaven, but the archangel told me to help the corrupted earth. So I came down." I thought he was joking, so I laughed and played along. "Really? Then where are your wings?" He touched his back and replied, "When I was born in a human body, my wing bones became too small. I miss flying." I just laughed it off. However, the interesting thing was that he really had a kind heart like an angel. When he saw homeless people on the street, he would take them to his house, feed them plenty of food, and pray for them. He also cried all night when he saw people who had accidents or were in unfortunate situations on the news. I was touched by his actions, and we became close friends. But as time went on, darkness began to cover him. His house started to be filled with countless homeless people, and thieves broke in and stole things recklessly. But he forgave them all. Every time this happened, I told him to take care of his belongings, but he just closed his eyes and recited a prayer. Tears streamed down from his eyes. As time went on, he became increasingly dispirited. Whenever we met, he would stare at the sky with a sad face for a long time. As time passed, he began to act strangely. He yelled at a random passerby on the street, saying, "Your heart is filled with filthy greed. You should have a kind heart. I can see it all." The person flustered and ran away. Another time, we went to a restaurant together, and he suddenly slammed the table during the meal and shouted, "How can this be considered as food? Compared to the food in heaven, this is garbage." Then he covered his ears and screamed, "This is not music. Compared to the music in heaven, this is just noise. Then he sang hymns like a madman, and eventually we were kicked out. After that, he continued to cause trouble in the neighborhood, and I stopped contacting him. Several months passed. One day, I heard shocking news from a neighbor. Ian had gone missing. One day, a neighbor living next to Ian's house heard what sounded like hundreds of people singing hymns coming from Ian's house. So they knocked on Ian's door. But there was no one inside. Ian didn't show up for several months, and his parents and friends came to look for him but couldn't find him. So they eventually filed a missing persons report. One neighbor who saw Ian last claimed that he looked emaciated, as if he hadn't eaten for a long time, and his wing bones were abnormally and incredibly protruding. There was a note on Ian's desk which read, "I came down to heal this world, but now I have lost my light. The children of Satan are whispering to me day and night to come down to hell. Dear God, please take me back to heaven." Ian is still missing.
I still can't forget the man I met when I was young, the man who scared me most in the world. However, I still don't know his face. If only I could know his face, I could report him to the police now. The terrible memory from back then is still vivid in my mind as if it were yesterday. It was 20 years ago, during a hot summer when I was a middle school student. I lived in the countryside and played with my friends by the river and in the mountains every day. However, my grandmother always warned me not to go to the mountains at night, saying that faceless people roamed there, but I just thought she was trying to scare me. However, later I realized that my grandmother's words were not a joke to scare me. One day, my friend and I were playing in the mountains and didn't realize how late it was getting. As it got dark, we hurried back home, but got lost on the way. We panicked and wandered around for a while, but then I saw a man approaching us. At first I felt relieved to see him, but the closer he got, the more uneasy I felt. He asked us what we were doing there, but I got chills because his lips didn't move when he spoke. After a moment, I realized he was wearing a mask, but it wasn't a mask. It was made of someone else's facial skin. At first, I thought it was fake, but when I looked closely, I saw that it was real, and I saw several twisted marks between the skin. Suddenly, he picked up a rock and hit my friend's head. My friend fell, and the man pulled out a knife and started to cut off my friend's facial skin. I heard my friend screaming in pain. I ran away, screaming like crazy without looking back. I didn't know where I was going, and just jumped down, running towards the bottom. When I looked back, he wasn't chasing me. He was only focused on peeling my friend's facial skin. I ran further away and looked back, and he was holding my friend's skin in his hand. At that moment, I saw his real face. He grinned at me and shouted, "Come here! Want to try wearing the mask?" I saw his mouth moving, but I couldn't see his features clearly from that distance. I wanted to get closer and see his face, but I was afraid I would die. I ran away again, as if going insane. After running for a while, I came back to my senses and realized that I was down the mountain. I ran back home, crying, and told my mother, who reported it to the police. The police soon arrived at the mountain and found my friend's body with his facial skin removed, but they never found the culprit. When the police asked me if I saw his face, I said yes, but it wasn't his real face. The police searched for him, but they never found him. Afterwards, the village was abuzz for a while, but as time passed, it gradually faded from my memory. After that day, no one went to the mountain again. Time passed, and I moved to the city and lived a normal life as an office worker, burying the terrible memory in my mind. But sometimes, I still think about that day and try to remember his face. I try my best to recall the man's face from my memories, but I just can't seem to see it. I've struggled to remember his face with all my might, sweating profusely, but it was always a failure. So, I am still in doubt tonight as I drift off to sleep. Who was he really? If only I had gotten closer to him back then, could I have seen his face.
Back when I was a senior in high school, a buddy of mine's parents went on this anniversary trip down to the Florida Keys for a weekend, leaving him as the sole occupier of their 3-bedroom house. His older sister was off at college, so he literally had the entire place to himself. So, he did what any self-respecting teenager does when faced with that kind of situation. He threw a house party. And not just the kind where 2 dozen or so of your closest friends come over for some drinks. He threw a rager, the kind of party that half our entire high school managed to get an invite to. I mean, not everyone made it, but there was at least 200 people there at the very minimum. The old house was bouncing, for real. Now, I know people were playing fast and loose with the kinds of people they told about the party. There was no planning involved, basically, and my buddy wasn't the kind of guy to put the effort into making sure only a select bunch of people got it, so he basically just was like, bring all y'all's friends over, everyone he knew on Facebook. So people we didn't even know just showed up like, oh yeah, I know, XYZ, etc., etc., and whoever opened the door to them would just be like, whatever, and let them inside. This turned out pretty cool for the most part, and we ended up meeting some pretty decent randoms as a result. But not everyone that showed up was cool or there to just chill, and we ended up learning the hard way that you don't just throw out invites to your house party unless you want some bad hombres to show up once in a while. So, the party was in full swing, music is pumping, people were drinking and dancing. It was an awesome time. Then, some drama apparently kicks off in an upstairs bedroom when one of the randoms that showed up gets caught stealing by someone who knew my buddy. This person is being an all-around good guy by taking it personally and wanting to keep our buddy's house safe, so he starts telling this random thief to leave the party before he gets knocked out. These guys are stepping to each other. The thief's boys step in, but they're outnumbered by everyone at the party, so they just went back down and headed for the front door to the house. But as they're leaving, this mutual friend of ours is walking them out, talking smack, telling them he does MMA and they're smart not to mess with him, etc., etc. Just drunk guy stuff, you know. He was probably showing off in front of his girl or something too, who knows. Anyway, the guy walks them all the way out, opens up the front door, then sings, na 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 na, hey hey hey, goodbye, song like in their faces before he slams the door behind them. Now, I didn't see this next part, so I'm just telling you guys what I've been told happened. Apparently the guy stands in front of the door, fists on hips, puffing his chest out in some Superman pose like, yeah, I kicked these idiots out, get me. People were literally clapping for the dude like he was some kind of hero, and then out of nowhere, people just start hearing these cracking sounds coming from the street outside, before our hero just slumps to the carpet. One of the thieves we just kicked out turned out to have a gun on him, and he was so angry at the way our buddy just tried to humiliate him that he pulled it out and fired it right at the front door. He ended up shooting this guy 4 times in the back and neck. We immediately called 911, got the guy on a stretcher pretty quick, but one of the bullets nicked an artery or something, and although they got him to the hospital in good time, he didn't make it. The shooter handed himself in to the police the next day. Apparently he had no idea that there was anyone still behind the door and just wanted to damage some property while scaring the people still inside. He had no intention of actually hurting anyone, and through some sort of plea bargain, I know he managed to pretty much get off with second-degree murder or something. Basically, he'd get a super lenient sentence. And this all happened about 14 years ago too, so I'm pretty sure that guy's getting out soon. And that scares me way more than knowing that there's a dude who murdered someone at a party that I was at. And he's just free to walk around the city like the thing he did wasn't even that big of a deal. Like how he is supposed to just act like nothing happened all those years ago. Does he just try and forget? Because although I'm really glad I didn't actually see anyone get shot, it's not something I've ever forgotten, and nor am I likely to. And honestly, my biggest worry right now is bumping into this guy in the grocery store or something. I'm not sure I'll be able to hold it together if I see him. Here's hoping he decides to make a fresh start someplace else. That's what I'd do. I just wouldn't be able to hang around the same old people, knowing I murdered one of them.